Welcome to ESSA TV. Joining us today is the Honourable Kim Beazley AC, former Leader of the Opposition and the former Australian Ambassador to the US. In his distinguished political career, Mr Beazley also served as a Cabinet Minister in the Hawke and Keating Labor governments and as Deputy Prime Minister.
Upon returning to Australia, he has been appointed as a Senior Fellow at the Perth USAsia Centre, among various other roles. Mr Beazley, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be with you.
I'd like to start by asking you about your time as the Australian Ambassador to the United States. How did our relationship with the United States develop during your tenure, and how strong is it compared to the relationships both countries have with other nations?
Well, it developed during the time I was there, in continuation, a trend that had been pretty evident in the last decade or so, and that was that even though after the Cold War we sort of expected that the various components of the Western Alliance would gradually dissolve, go away, cease to be important, the relationship with Australia actually got stronger in the aftermath of the Cold War. And as the Ambassador to Australia, I witnessed a fair bit of this. There were two reasons for that. The first was that the dominant feature of the American position after the Vietnam War in the region we inhabit was, well, Allies could look after themselves in that area. It was an area of lesser priority during the Cold War. That all changed with the dynamic of the rising growth of the Asia-Pacific region and its centrality to the global economy. So rather than see us as a good friend in a backwater, the United States started to see us as a nation, if you like, on the front line of the most important economic development globally. The second reason was that Australia found itself in a situation where really the distribution of power, in military terms, was shifting against it. That, for example, when I was the Defence Minister and did the 1987 White Paper, our GDP was greater than ASEAN's combined. And now, Indonesia alone of the ASEAN nations is likely to pass us in the next couple of years. And at the same time, a revolution in military affairs has occurred, which meant that the technologies that the United States possessed were even more important, if you like, to the technological defence of Australia. So those were two big trends. Also found too, when I was there, that the United States had started to treat us differently. Given that they had developed the view that the Asia-Pacific region or Indo-Pacific region was a core American area of interest, they were looking around for people that they could talk to, people who would empathise with their situation, understand them. And when they look around, even though I'd say that Japan was their most important ally in the region, we were their best muse, the best people to bounce ideas off, to get ideas from. So I remember when I was ambassador, we used to hold these regular talks of senior officials in the national security area on both sides at our residence in Washington. That's just one example of it. But the point was that I think we have become, as the years have gone by, a much more significant ally to them than they were. Americans like to say, we have no better friend than Australia. Well, that of course means that there are other friends as good. But I'm not sure that would have been the way in which they would necessarily have described us back in the 80s.
Australia-US relations during the Trump administration got off to a rocky start with an infamous and, quote, hostile phone call that was ended abruptly by the President. How do you foresee our relationship with the United States changing during the first term of the Trump administration? And how can this relationship remain strong and even be strengthened over the next 4 years?
Well, the new administration is problematic on the day-to-day diplomacy front. You still don't really know in what direction the United States is going to take policy, or the Trump administration is going to take policy in our region, where they're going to end up, and whether or not a consistent diplomacy and approach will emerge. There's a sort of, if you like, a sort of vacuum around the Trump administration at the White House level that is constantly being filled by countervailing forces. What there is not a vacuum around is in the traditional elements of the American national security bureaucracy, the State Department, the Defense Department, the intelligence services and the like. They are pretty much persisting along in directions that were evident before Trump came into office. And they are the folk that we generally relate to. So all the meetings, if you like, the meetings, the engagement, the discussions of mutual interest, etc., are all taking place. They're taking place at the level of the agencies. Now that's actually a reflection of the fact that the Australian-American alliance in its functional structure is very deep. So we are deeply embedded in their military and intelligence services and vice versa. We're spending $14 million a working day in their defence industry. American investment in Australia is increasing very rapidly, and that's very rapidly off a very high base. So if you like, the underpinnings of Australian-American relations have barely been scratched by the advent of the Trump administration. Nevertheless, relationships with the administration are important. We all got a bit hyper, I think, about that testy phone call between Trump and Turnbull. I have to say that when I was Defence Minister, and even as Ambassador, a bit less so, I did have some very testy conversations with the Americans, which from time to time are at least as bad as that. The point is that, when you're actually in the engine room of an alliance relationship, or any relationship, not just an alliance relationship, underneath the surface, there's a lot of argument going on. It rarely spills onto the surface, but on that particular occasion it did, basically because Trump saw the deal that we did with Obama on shifting folk in offshore settlements to the United States was pretty rich on our part, pretty rich, and it happened to collide with an element of Trump's policy which he was following through on. However, it's a testament to the strength of the character of the relationship, even though the agreement was deeply embarrassing to Trump. They nevertheless persist with it.
You've been a strong advocate against protectionism, as the Republican Party has long been too. However, President Trump has taken a very different turn, withdrawing from the TPP and implementing tariffs on a wide range of goods and services. Why is freer trade and a continuation of the TPP without the US the right move for Australia, in your opinion? And how would you rebuff the President's claims?
Yeah, one of the things that disturbs me in an analysis of current American politics is that the Republican commitment to global free trade has got a question mark over it, where prior to the elevation of Trump there was none. It's quite interesting. The public position of Republicans generally in the United States, I'm talking here not just simply about members of the Congress, but more broadly in the community, has started to ape some of the Trump views on free trade. And while a majority of Americans continue to support free trade, the Republican component of that is diminishing, and ironically the Democrat component of it is increasing, even though the Democrats have been pretty quizzical of it for some considerable period of time. So that's one of the many imponderables that you have to address when you take a look at future directions in the United States. Actually, in practical terms, the sorts of anti-dumping provisions and the like that Trump has been putting in place are not any different from those that were being put in place by the Obama administration. There's been a lot of concern in the United States about dumping of Chinese product, and for example in steel, China is now down to about 3% of American imports. So the steel fight that's going on at the moment is basically going on with Europe, and I suppose in a tiny way, to a lesser extent, us. But that's not the only matter under consideration. And Trump has clearly backed and filled in this attitude that he's had on free trade. Yes, he vetoed the TPP, but that was a very easy thing for him to do. His negotiations with China have gone basically in both directions. At some points, they've looked as though, oh yes, well, we're arriving at an understanding here. We want to do that because the Chinese are important in what we want to do about North Korea and other areas and the like. Then on the other hand, he's substantially increased the freedom of navigation operations in the South China Seas. He expresses disappointment about where the Chinese have got to or failed to get to in terms of negotiations with North Korea. And then the trade issue comes back on the table. So last week, I think, or the week before last, they had another round of negotiations which are hyped as likely to produce really strident adversarial outcomes, but they didn't. But you can see in the policies that are emerging from the Trump administration that they could. This is what I mean about that sort of vacuum that is now in the White House, where the not very clear directions are emerging, and you have to go to the agencies for any clear direction. So I don't think the free trade issue is a lost issue, if you like, with the Trump administration, because there's a lot of countervailing forces to the positions that Trump seemed to be adopting. Trump's not a normal politician. He has attitudes, and we know what his attitudes are, and the attitudes are what plays out there during the course of election campaigns. But when you're actually in office, attitudes are not enough. You require a policy and then a program attached to the policy, and the program has to take account of the extraordinarily complex realities around you. Well, Trump has nothing like that. And so he's in a position really where you have the capacity for influence. You can make an argument to him. And that's why I think it's actually quite important to keep the TPP alive. Because the TPP basically was an agreement in American interests. The countries that signed up, at least the Asian elements of the countries that signed up to the TPP, were doing so not so much to make economic gains themselves, though they did make some, was basically to engage the United States more actively in the region. Now, I used to say when I debated the TPP with American politicians back at the time I was ambassador, I'd point out to them this fact. The real rate of protection of American manufacturing industry was 1.5%. After the TPP came fully into operation, it would still be 1.5%. Now, why would that be so? Well, the reason's quite simple. The United States has already given it the office. The United States has been the importer of last resort that has driven, until recent times, growth in the Asian economy overall. And therefore, it was always likely, when you get into an arrangement like the TPP, that probably overwhelmingly its components, particularly the new elements of it in electronic commerce and the behind-the-border removal of restrictions on services and the like, would actually move in favour of the United States rather than necessarily in favour of all the negotiating parties. So the TPP has this virtue in terms of your discussions with the United States. You know, and a large number of American decision makers know, that the agreement is in the interests of the United States. And with that out there in the environment, that's objectively the case. At some point of time, you might be able to convince the Trump administration of it, and if you call it something else, at that point of time, you're likely to find them sign up. So it's actually worthwhile keeping the TPP alive. It's worthwhile keeping the free trade debate alive. It is true that the globe is moving in a somewhat protectionist direction. That is just simply emphatically not in Australia's interests. You can make a case for autarky in the United States. You can make a case for autarky, I suppose, in many large countries and economies, and you can make a case for autarky in the EU as a whole. It's not a good case, but you can make the case. What you can't make a case for is autarky for a country with a market of 24 million, like Australia, sitting in the middle of a market of, if you take the whole Asia Pacific together, about 3 billion. It makes absolutely no sense. Why would you come to invest in Australia with a closed market for 24 million people when there's that market that's out there? You can make the case of coming to invest in Australia if Australia's connected with that market. So we're not in the position of the Americans or the Europeans. We're not in the position where we can indulge protectionist sentiment. Protectionist sentiment in Australia is a dead set job killer and a security killer indirectly. So that's why I think it's worthwhile keeping as much on the table as you can, and the TPP just happens to be one of those things that's worth kicking around. If you can't do it now, maybe 5 years from now you can.
In a recent article, you noted that the only agreement that would see Australia automatically thrust into war is one signed in 1953 that compels us to defend South Korea in the event of an attack by the North. Relations between the Western world and North Korea have worsened in 2017, with the recent testing of a North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile potentially capable of reaching Australia and Alaska. In your opinion, how has President Trump handled rising tensions in the Korean Peninsula, and how can we avoid such a war that would force Australia into combat?
Yeah, the point that I made is an extension from the character of the armistice agreement that was reached in 1953. Not many Australians know that technically we're still at war with North Korea. Not just us, but all the people who are in the United Nations Command. We're all at war with North Korea, but we have an armistice. So that's a cessation of hostilities, and there's been an attempt to build around that, of course, a set of stable relations which the North Koreans seem absolutely determined on upsetting. So that's why I made the point that I do, that if the armistice broke down, well, it would be the war in continuation, and we would actually be in it, because we said we would. When we signed up to the armistice in 53. So that gives us a very direct interest in how relations with North Korea are handled. North Korea, I'm told, is one of the few areas which actually, when the intelligence reports on it come in, and the policy reports, the diplomatic reports on attitudes evolving in South Korea, North Korea, Japan and the like related to Korea, Trump actually reads and tries to comprehend, because he has that sense that the United States might find itself in fairly severe trouble over it all. So Trump is focused. He tried to get the Chinese engaged, or is trying to get the Chinese engaged, though he's sceptical now that whether or not that will succeed. And that's not a bad idea. It was a bad idea on his part to go down that road. I think he is discovering how hard it would be to get up a legal justification for preemption, or to do preemption itself in an environment where really quite severe damage might occur in the South and in Japan if a war ever broke out, even if the war happened to be won. So he is thrashing about looking for a negotiated solution. I don't know anything about these conversations for a fact, but I would not be surprised if those various conversations he had with President Putin of Russia, which have been so well outlined, or the circumstances around them outlined in the press, I would not be surprised if incorporated in those discussions with Putin was a sort of a bit of a plea for, well, help. So can we get together a negotiation here? Can we get together the conditions, the basis for a negotiation with North Korea? You, after all, Russia, have a very substantial interest in that, because if you can get an agreement put in place and get a settlement between North and South, be open to your possibilities, even a pipeline of gas coming from Russia through that area into the East Asian zone, which would be enormously to the benefit of Russia and begin to diminish what is effectively becoming your vassal status in relation to China. I mean, these are things which I suspect Trump may well have been talking to Putin about. Anyway, the thing about Trump is that he is open to a negotiation there. He is trying to work out some way in which he can use his military to effectively pressure for that negotiation. But he is focused on it. He's focused on the way. He's not focused on other issues.
As opposition leader, you advocated for Australia to become a republic. How soon are we likely to see the next major push for an Australian republic, and how could this change propel the country economically?
Well, there'd be, I think the Republican thing can come on the table really at any time. You've got a Prime Minister who's a Republican, you've got the opposition who are Republican, you've got a substantial section of the Liberal Party, of course, who are not. I wouldn't expect it necessarily to come onto the table unless there was a change of government, however. But if there was a change of government, I wouldn't expect it to be their priority, but I think it would be somewhere there in their plans of the medium to long term. I think that there's a sentiment in the community in Australia that's enormous, that sees the Queen deservedly enormously well regarded. And there's not really, as there has been in the past, a sort of vigorous effort on the part of the political process to generate another referendum, which would be very frustrating for the Republican movement. Probably a majority of Australians are Republicans, but there is not the impetus at the moment to see that change. I think that were the Queen to pass away or abdicate, I think you'd see it definitely come heavily back on the agenda at that point.
Mr. Beazley, thank you very much for your time today and for sharing your valuable insights with us.
No worries.